Among the biggest risks from the moment that Biden announced that he was running for president, late 2018, 2019, was going to be when a debt ceiling crisis emerged, put crisis in quotes, and he sat down with Republicans in Congress. Like, that was always the scariest part to me of a potential Biden White House and now an actual Biden White House. And, he kept doing this thing where I'm not negotiating. Everybody just lift the debt ceiling. That's how we've done it before. We're going to do it again. That's great if you want to take that posture. But at the same time, he had Janet Yellen, and he himself was taking off the table, for the most part, the 14th Amendment and kind of dismissing the mint the coin or any other kind of creative way around it. So you're then stuck with, okay, we're not going to negotiate with you, but we're also not going to do anything other than lift it legislatively, which gives you the power, you Republicans and Republicans in the Senate, the power to not lift the debt ceiling. And so, of course, as a result of that, they're going to wind up negotiating. Like, that's the only path you've left yourself. In the last couple of weeks, he made allusion or two to the 14th Amendment. And that instantly got McCarthy, back on his heels, saying, he better not do that. And the irony, of course, is when McCarthy's saying he better not do that, McCarthy actually, I think, would desperately love for Biden to do that, because that gets McCarthy out of the jam that he's also
right.
McCarthy doesn't really care about. He's a nihilist. Does he care about adding work requirements to food stamp recipients? I don't think he cares. If he can do it, and people applaud him for it, fine. What he really cares about is maintaining the speakership and maintaining power in the House of Representatives. And so if Biden just said, we're doing 14th Amendment, we're going around you, he could put a motion of anger on the House floor, and
resolution. We're super upset, and this is Biden's a czar, and he's a dictator, and that's it. And they would, and I would imagine all future leaders of the Republican Party would also be excited about it, because once the precedent is set, nobody has to deal with this anymore.
Yeah.
And what do you think it is?
Briar Patch resolution. Yeah, how dare you throw us into that briar patch?
What do you think because this is the amazing thing about it. They're going to, and they're talking about now work requirements. And, as we were talking this morning about it, like Em and I both said, like, this sounds like that thing where you float something that's really horrible, so that when the deal comes back and it's just horrible, you feel like you've won. And David Dayen wrote a similar thing in a piece that he had about Punch Bowl and how that's just sort of like twisting the narrative. But I do think that they're actually going to end up with actual cuts. And I do think they're going to claw back COVID money. And the dollar amount, from the perspective of like a Republican who really wants to, supposedly is principled about spending money, or from a Democrat who like secretly wants to, be fiscally conservative, the dollar amount, even for both of those two parties, is negligible. The only real impact that dollar amount has is like on several 100,000 families who are getting food stamps, maybe millions, several, the municipalities that were planning on building that community center or dealing with that opioid treatment facility or whatever it was. That's where it matters. But like in the grand scheme of things, we're talking not that much.
Right, because they already took off the table. They took ideologically the Pentagon off the table. In the State of the Union, they took Medicare and Social Security off the table. They don't want to get too tangled up in veterans benefits because they already tripped over their shoelaces on that one. And so what does that leave them with? Exactly, food stamps and basically local funding for, so we're talking like you said, schools, local health care, those construction infrastructure, and all of this COVID money that it was appropriated but hasn't been fully spent yet. So right, that's all they have left to go after. And they probably want, if you're Republicans, you probably want a bit of a tiny little economic crisis that can drag down economic growth heading into an election year. That's what Mitch McConnell got in not just 2012, but also 2014. Like, I don't think that Republicans take the Senate back in 2014, if not for the horrible deal that Biden ended up cutting with them, combined with the shock that came about through getting so close to the default and getting their debt downgrade. And then if you don't lose the Senate in 2014, you don't lose the Supreme Court either. So I think that there are a couple things they want to do here. One is the cutting, but they also, I legitimately want to do what they did before, which is slow down the economy with a Democrat in the White House. What is
the explanation for the Biden administration? Because, like I say, I can take the most cynical view, and like Biden really likes cuts to food stamps, but they're not. They're significant for the people who are getting the cuts, but it's like he's not going to. It's not. If he's really into this, he's not going to get excited about it. It's not enough pain to excite, I would imagine him. He's going to be moving on to the next thing very quickly. Like, what is the political value here? I mean, none of this makes any sense from the perspective of like just sheer good politics.
I think part of it is this establishment kind of Washington brain, and it dovetails with his re-election pitch. The whole speech is about not just freedom, but also, the rule of law, making things normal and boring, like making, not Trump, being not a chaos agent. So the opposite of chaos agent is we follow the rules. Democrats love to follow rules, period. Like, you got a rule, they're gonna follow it, and they're gonna add extra kind of procedures around how they're gonna follow that rule. And they're gonna add checks and balances to make sure everybody does follow that rule, whereas Republicans are just making it up as they go along in a pure power-based way. So I think it kind of just fits with that kind of Democratic idea that they are not chaos, they're not Trump, they are the people who do things by the book, and the book says you got to lift the debt ceiling, and it doesn't hurt that it fits in with Biden's like real sense that austerity is good politics that he has held for 50 years. He got out of that the last couple of years, and the more he got out of that, the higher his approval rating went. The more he returned to his old self, the more his approval rating dropped. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to be
registering. No, It doesn't seem to be registering. And the amazing thing is that if they were to tomorrow just simply say, like, you know what, we've talked to the Office of Legal Counsel. They say we're good. It's under the 14th Amendment. People can look it up. Meanwhile, no crisis. Over. The blowback from the American public could not blow out a single birthday candle. Like, it would be just like, it would just go away. No one would say a word. There's no constituency. It's like the only thing they care about is what's going on between like the Axios newsletter, the Punch Bowl newsletter, the Politico newsletter. And, I don't know what else. Like, it is amazing how insulated the people making this decision are. It doesn't make sense politically. It doesn't make sense. It's amazing to me. And this is, it feels immutable. I mean, there's at least with this sort of ilk of Democratic politician. I'm not even talking ideology. I'm just talking about sense of how the world works.
It actually makes me think that we need to bring HuffPost Hill back, or I need to be sending my own newsletter kind of on like a daily basis and reformat it closer to the Punch Bowl, Axios kind of mold, because at least then when HuffPost Hill, if your listeners would, I don't know if they would remember it or not, it went out every day. It was widely read around Washington, kind of daily news with a left-wing humorous kind of take to it. And it served as an actual counterbalance kind of to some of the conventional wisdom that it prevented it from congealing as much, because and congealing is a good word, because you got to just keep poking that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. It wants to congeal, but it can be poked at.
So what do you think, though? I keep returning to the fact that Zients is now the guy in the room as Biden's chief of staff, as opposed to Ron Klain. Like, can we trace a lot of that back, or a lot of what we're seeing right now back to Biden being a cipher, and then this is the guy that's in the room with him now?
Some of it, but Ron Klain was here a couple months ago, and so he's not completely without blame. He could have 6 months ago said, "Look, we're doing the 14th Amendment.
Yeah,
like we're setting this up. Like we see this coming. Like nobody's going to be surprised by this." Or could have said, "Look, we're doing this when we have the majority. Like we're going to put it into a package of bills." Now, could you get Manchin to do that? I don't know. They got Manchin to do a lot of things that Manchin said he would never do. So the fact that Ron Klain left it with Zients, I think, means that you can't quite put all the blame on Zients. But yeah, that was the big concern when he came in, that he would be, that Zients would be much more willing to kind of negotiate around this.
Well, the good news is at least Neera Tanden is now top domestic advisor, so she'll take care of that. But I just want to make one point about the HuffPost briefing, because I think this is really insightful, both disturbing and insightful in the sense that that literally could have an impact. Like the idea that there's another newsletter going around that just sort of prevents the dilemma that, and this goes across the board for progressives, is if you look at the Punch Bowl newsletter and the Axios one and the Politico one, somewhere on that newsletter, it is, sponsored by, ExxonMobil, or sponsored by Goldman Sachs, or sponsored by, and they're, the American Petroleum Institute, whoever it is. And the problem is that unless you get a big funder like Huffington to do the Huffington Post at that time, whose politics happen to align to some extent anyways, or deviate from American Petroleum Institute and Goldman Sachs and this and that, you don't have the funding mechanism. You can turn out, we have the AM Quickie, we do that, but it doesn't have the heft, the money behind it to make it a Capitol Hill read. And this is what's so sort of vexing to, folks with a sort of any type of outside perspective. It's how do you break into that? And it's both ideological, but it's really just talking about there's this sequestered clique. And how do you get in there without having the money that it takes? I mean, this is the perennial dilemma, it seems to me.
Yeah, and it's hard to do, but it's so worth it because once you're in there, then you're in the heads also of all of the newsletter writers and everybody else, that they have to start to think about other ways of approaching an issue. It just broadens the question. And you could, I think, jam in and if you remember back then, the Huffington Post was hammering that mint the coin and 14th Amendment stuff throughout 2011. And, it ended up being the Freedom Caucus that saved the day there, because they wouldn't accept all of the Medicare and Social Security cuts because they came along with some very meager tax increases that weren't even tax increases, but it was, Grover Norquist was going to call them tax increases. So they just blew the whole thing up. So maybe we still get that this time, that the Freedom Caucus says, we don't like any of this.
Hope springs eternal. I guess we'll see. But I mean, it is an interesting thing to keep in mind, and in terms of that breaking up it really is just, I don't know, it's nuts in many respects.